Yes, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks so much, Mark, for joining at this relatively late hour in the UK.
That's fine.
And thank you. And Greg, thank you so much for joining as well.
Too easy, too easy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So really the point of this webinar, we haven't had webinars for a while. We started them kind of late last year and had them going for a while, and they were great, and then kind of lost touch with them as the year changed, as we went into the holiday season and stuff. So we thought we'd pick them back up again because this is kind of the week that a lot of people start thinking about golf again.
Yeah.
This is Masters Week. So a lot of my friends, coaches, and people are out there at Augusta National today, playing practice rounds and getting ready for the tournament, which is a super cool place. I've been there once as a patron, and I believe it was the year after Mike Weir won, the first year Phil Mickelson won. I think it was 2004, I believe. I was out there as a patron.
Yeah.
And I think one of the first things you notice when you walk on property, have you been there, Mark?
Yeah, I've been 4 times, luckily.
Four
Yeah,
times.
as a
Okay.
spectator. Yeah, as a 4 times I've enjoyed it. The times I've
Okay,
been.
so I'd like to hear your first impressions, but my first impression was the slopes. So I remember my first second on property. I walked on property and walked out and found the 10th tee. And you look at that 10th tee and it just goes off and then the golf course disappears. Like there's that
10th
massive
is
slope.
I've walked up that 10th slope and it's not advisable.
Like you're an athlete, Mark. Like you're an athlete. Yeah.
Me and the guy I was with, we walked up it for some reason. I think I was meeting someone on the putting green. So we walked up it and we were the only two people
going in that direction. Right. Yeah. Going in that direction. I agree. It is a steep slope. So that is something that I don't think you see on TV. No. I'm wondering of the patron or of the attendees here, if anyone has been there or played it. And for the attendees, if you have questions or anything, please just type them in the chat. There's a Q&A box, there's a chat box. I'll be monitoring both of those as we go. So if anyone has played it on played Augusta National and want to kind of type their impressions or what they've seen, that would be awesome. And also if anyone has even just been there as a patron, yeah, feel free to ask questions through the chat box. But I'm gonna guess, based on the exclusivity of the property and the difficulty of getting access to it, that probably going to be only one person on this webinar who has been out there.
Yeah.
And it's Mr. Chalmers. How many times have you played it?
Just
I mean, in the tournament.
Yeah,
1 year. Okay.
1 year, 2001. I finished. I had a top 4 in the USPGA in 2000 when Bob May lost to Tiger Woods, and that gets you in the field the following year.
Okay.
So yeah, I got to play there. It's like you said, it's really, really challenging. It's quite confronting when you first go there to get used to the idea of what you thought it was going to be like, and it's really hard to put into words the change in topography that you see. You're going to have to hit with the ball below your feet, above your feet, uphill, downhill. That's going to be attacked at you all day, and so it's something that you have to know how that effects are going to have on the ball flight and how you move. To be fair, in 2001, I had no clue. I think I'd have a better idea now, but yeah, at that time it was a lot of the cliched sort of stuff that you imagine that you'd see from hitting off slubs, but at least an interesting discussion you could have about this today.
Yeah, and so I remember a long time ago, a lot of people claiming that a lefty would never win at Augusta because it is such a right to left golf course.
Right.
And that being a fade for a lefty. And then obviously, I think we talked about this when we were working together in January, like probably the most severe slope would be the slope on 13 for the second shot, would you say?
Yeah, probably down 10, down 2, and then that's downhill slopes, pretty chronic.
Yeah, and 2's amazing slope, isn't it? Yes, when you get past that bunker, it literally is like.
So it's like a downhill slope. Yeah.
It feels like the ball will never stop. And then the 13, I think I had a 3-iron off the side slope, and that was before they put the new tees in. So I don't think I'd hit 3-iron now for sure. But
you hit sand wedge now, Greg. Come on.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, thank you.
Stay on brand.
Yeah, stay on brand. Yeah. So, but honestly, when you're hitting that club, the commentators make it sound like, oh, he should just aim left and just let it for a right-hander fade it in there. It's extremely difficult to do because. Yeah. Honestly, for a right-hander, it feels like I turned around, took a look at it. It feels like the ball is at knee height.
Right.
Like it's way above your feet the higher you go up that hill. And then the other one that's really quite difficult and a massive slope is the wedge shot into 15 if you lay up.
Right.
It's horrible, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a horrible shot I like to have. And hence where you see the best players in the world really struggle to get distance control right.
Right.
And because they're hitting off this massive downslope, trying to get the ball up and stop into a very narrow sort of width target.
And it looks narrower subject to how far down you are, don't it?
Yes.
So the further you go down, it actually looks like a car bonnet. You know what I mean? It
Yes.
looks like as you're stood on top of the hill, you look down at the green, you see some depth. And then as you get close, because there's a walkway, I think about 114 yards. I took a rangefinder in when I went and I measured it. I think it's 114-ish, I guess. Can't remember now. And I remember standing there thinking, yeah, I don't want this wedge shot. I'd rather have a hybrid at the back there and have a go whacking it in the bunker or over the back. Like that wedge shot would be one of the last shots I would want on that hole, because you just don't see the green. It's like as soon as you get the green eye, you just see it like a tabletop almost.
Right.
Definitely nasty.
It's also too, like, yeah, it's like an optical illusion on that hole. It's also too, they do a great job of mowing everything against the grain.
Yeah.
So now you think about you're on slopes, downhill, side hill, and then you're trying to make sure you hit the ball first and not dunk it in the water on some of the shots. So yeah, it's definitely it's extremely challenging.
That is. And then spin control too, because if you get the ball back in your stance and you get the ball first and you put more spin on it, then you could suck it back into the water, right? Even if you get the carry distance proper.
Yeah, depending on conditions and what they serve up. Yes. And you've seen that, and you'll probably
I've seen that. Yeah, quite a bit. That's interesting. So being Augusta National Week and with all these slopes, kind of the point of this webinar and the reason we asked you two guys to join was the kind of experience we had in January right before the PGA show. So Greg and I have worked together on Your Golf Swing a couple of times. I think we kind of worked virtually one time, and then we met down in San Diego that one time. So this is the third time. And I believe like my diagnosis and my kind of thought of what you needed was the same all three times. But it really didn't kind of stick until we got access to this technology that we used that third time, I believe, which was where we combined our force plates embedded in the Zen green stage or the Zen swing stage, which is the thing that can then tilt us onto different slopes.
Yeah.
And this has really opened my mind to the power of using slopes as almost a constraint in golf instruction. So I've given you every cue that I could think of in the book to try to produce kind of what I thought you wanted or I thought you needed in your swing, and worked a little bit kind of when we worked together, then you went off and it kind of went away and didn't work so well. But I think this really gave us the feeling. So can you kind of tell us a little bit more about your game recently, Greg, and kind of your idea of kind of what the problems were? And if you want to tell your Q school story, you're welcome to.
Yeah.
If you don't want to, if you want to forget about that, then that is fine as well. So.
Yeah. So just for our listeners, look, I'm a left-hander who's had a big handsy draw, like really relying on good hands or good club face control. And obviously I have days where that goes well and other days where it doesn't. I've never really felt hard rotation out of the lead side. I've never really felt that. I feel like I move left and right versus rotating, and they're my terms. I don't know if that's resonates, but
makes sense.
No, that's perfect.
Yeah. So, and that's the feedback we got from Swing Catalyst. It was a lateral left and right. Does that make sense? Am I saying that right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's great.
Rather than the shearing motion or pushing out of the lead foot, which opens the hips up and gives me more. It's been really interesting, honestly, Scott, because I came to you and I think I'm, with a 7-iron, 3 to 5 degrees inside on path. And we moved it in 30 minutes with Zen Green Stage. We moved it to neutral, sometimes 1 degree. Like we had a 3 to 4 degree change in path of club face and path, without thinking about path at all.
Yeah.
And what I've found as I've now been doing this, it's been 3 months, and I've been working hard on it, and I'm tapping into the feeling more readily. I am able to aim in the middle of the green and trust that it won't hook. And I can hit ball much straighter. My iron play is improving on a daily basis. And I'm actually finding it as I get better and better at it. And we just had a chat pre to this where I was talking to Mark about, well, how do I hit a draw now? Because I've definitely found it's much more difficult for me to turn the ball over.
Right.
And so because most of my turning over and draw feelings were hand created, and I'm now trying to learn how to do it through just ground forces. And I see a future for that. I can see where I could just think about nothing but ground forces, and the club will just go where I want it to go, and it's just fascinating to me.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed it.
I think in my field, because I've worked on the same kind of thing in my swing, and the handsy drawer, it becomes such a timing related issue, right? You really have to time it perfectly, and you get some days where it's good, some days where it's bad. And I found myself, I mean, I have a 11-month-old son, and I've played 3 times since he was born, and I can still, using my ground forces, get it around. Where my old swing, where it was kind of timing related, if I didn't play 3 times in it in basically a year, I'd have no chance. I would hit it awful, and I can still kind of hit it decent, because I feel like I don't know, I have to talk to my motor learning friends on terms of like how to explain that scientifically, where using the ground versus kind of using kind of more degrees of freedom out here at the wrist or the hands, how that could affect things. But I think your knowledge, or your recollection of what happened that day is unbelievable, actually, because I just went through all the old swings, and I'm going to share my screen here so we can look through it. And so this was one of your first swings that we had on that particular. Oh no, this is the good one. What am I saying? I have it set up wrong. Here we go.
That's the flat
Here's one of your
yeah.
first swings. Yeah. So here's kind of on the flat Zen swing stage. So this is at Lake Nona in Orlando, right near where we were at for the PGA show. So all of us were in town for the PGA show, so we got access to this technology. I believe this is the first Zen swing stage with embedded dual swing catalyst sports plates in the world that they now have at Lake Nona. And
yeah,
really want to thank the guys at Nona, Daniel Gray, and Matt Collis there, for allowing us to use this system that day. That was very nice of them to give us access, or give us access to their facility. And so this, I left it on the down the line view, even though I kind of prefer the face on view for the stuff that we're talking about. The only problem is that day we had just this had just been set up, and the lefty face on camera wasn't working. So the face on camera is a nice view of Greggy's butt.
That's my best side.
So if Greggy's
such a typical left-hander shot, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, that is just the stereotypical left-hander shot.
Yeah.
Exactly. So if you look at the first thing, which is just the club delivery numbers, you are correct. So you had a 5-degree into out path to start with, which on this particular ball was just kind of a block to the right. It was a little bit of a push draw, or a push, which is the kind of hold the face off into out. And then you get the odd one where you flip the face, right? And then it goes way left and probably goes further, and then we're in some trouble. So, and if we look at the ground reaction forces and the pressure shift, you can see here you have a significant amount of horizontal force in this particular swing. So your horizontal force is 18% of your body weight, and that's in the middle of the tour average for driver. So currently we have a tour average band for driver, and yours is right in the middle of that with a 7-iron, whatever you were hitting here. And so there's a significant amount of horizontal force going on there. And then these are the shear forces coming out of your lead and trail side. So you can see you have 25% shear force coming out of your lead side, and 22% coming out of your trail side, and they act in opposite directions. So the trail foot is actually trying to drag back a bit, and you get 22% of kind of drag back force with your trail foot, which gives you kind of 22% force pushing your lead hip towards the golf ball. And then you're pushing your lead side towards the golf ball with 25%. So that 25% is pushing towards, which is giving us 25% pushback. So you have a little more out of your lead side than your trail side, but in all the work that I've done recently with good players, I'm telling people we generally need about 2/3 coming out of the lead side and 1/3 coming out of the trail side. So I like to see somewhere in the neighborhood of like 30 and 10-ish, to allow the left hip to clear better, allow the pelvis to move back away from the golf ball to give you space for your hands and arms to come down. And one thing that I noticed quite a bit in your swing with your pressure shift is you were getting, here you can see you get about 75% into your trail side. And I was trying to convince you that that's a little too much. And generally, like when I want to draw the ball quite a bit, I try to collapse this lead knee in quite a bit and create a little more of, I call it a Bubba Watson feel, like where you almost try to kiss your knees together. Because the more that this lead knee drops in towards the trail side, generally the more that we load into that trail side foot. And 75% isn't a ton, but I thought it was too much for you. But the only problem was when I tried to convince you of not doing that and not dropping the knee in as much, you kind of thought, oh, that's kind of a stacky or a stack and tilt type feel. And I don't know, you didn't seem to buy into that kind of thought as much in the first couple times we worked together. And so basically all we did with the Zen Green Stage then, or the Zen Swing Stage, sorry, was we put it on a slope. And so now we put you on this down slope. So you can see that's a significant slope there. I don't know what percentage that was.
6 degrees.
It was 6 degrees.
Yep.
Good. So we put you on this 6-degree swing stage slope. And automatically your lead side shear force that was 25 went to 33. So it increased 8%. And your trail side that was 22 went down to 17. So we've decreased the amount that your trail side is pulling back, and we increased the amount that your lead side was pushing forward. And the cool thing about this day was you hit a bunch of shots on the downhill slope. And remember, they were just bullet straight shots. And if we look at your launch monitor, you can see it's a bullet straight shot. If we look at the club details, we've now changed your path from, what was it, 5.2, I believe, into out down to 1.2. And you've actually added club speed and ball speed and smash factor. So we've had more speed club-wise. We've made a more solid contact, changed the path. I think it's just from kind of a less wipey impact, perhaps, could be from where the more smash factor has come from and more ball speed. And so all of these things were really good. Now, the problem was you'd hit 5 or 6 on the downhill slope, and then we'd put it flat and you'd go right back to your old thing, if you remember. It didn't kind of carry over to the flat surface until I noticed one thing. And if I look here now in your pressure shift, as you start to take the club away, you can see you get to a maximum now of 64% into your trail side, maybe 65 back here. So you're keeping about 10% less pressure into your trail side than you did before. And if I look at that kind of butt view swing now, you can see the difference in this left knee position. You can see how, and we didn't even say anything about it, right? You kind of just did this naturally.
The slope is doing that, isn't it?
The slope is doing that, right? It's making his knee go more towards the golf ball and less towards the other knee. And it's something that we'd worked on, I remember, in San Diego, and something that, you know, is hard for you to get out of there. But I don't think without having the force plates underneath your feet and showing you that's what you did kind of naturally on the force plates, whether you would have bought in quite as readily to it and worked on it quite a bit. And so, Mark, if you could talk a little bit, I mean, this change going from, and you know, people who haven't used a force plate before and haven't been around, going from 25% shear force out of the left foot to 33%, adding 8% shear force to the left foot.
Yeah.
You've used this with a bunch of lessons. Talk about kind of that magnitude and
yeah.
know,
well,
is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, it was the instantness of it, wasn't it? It was the instant factor that we were able to get Greg to begin to feel something different. And any coach knows like that's all you're trying to do, isn't it? You're going to use language to try and explain what you want them to do. But at the end of the day, they need to equate them to feels. They need to somehow feel and understand what you're saying. And you said it earlier, Greg, Scott, when you were saying, you know, you tried to get Greg this and he wasn't really investing because it felt to stack and tilt, or whatever term we want to give a movement that Greg was feeling.
Sure.
What the slope was able to do was able to take that emotion away a little bit. It was able just to force him without him feeling forced, you know. So you use bands a lot in the stuff you do, which is great. And all got teaching aids and things. They're kind of forcing people to do stuff, and they're good, but they can also be useless, because if you're forcing them to do it, how much are they doing it themselves? Now, obviously, the slope is forcing them as well, but there was also an element of Greg worked that out for himself. We didn't say, let's put this on a slope and then now feel this. Right. We just went, let's put it on a slope. And it actually happened, didn't it? Because the night before at the Swing Catalyst Ambassador meet, we had a good player on there hitting shots, didn't we? And it wasn't actually anything to do with what we were showing, but like this player literally changed. I can't remember what force it was. And this guy was like, was he mini tour player? He was like,
I believe, yeah. He was, you know, trying to make it, So
yeah, he changed one of his forces. I can't remember what it was because you were present, you know, you presenting to loads of coaches, like just in one shot. And I remember looking at you going, look at that. Like I've never seen a good player change
exact magnitude of change in such a short
in
time.
one swing. And you didn't even tell him to do anything because we weren't working. You weren't working with him. He was just hitting shots, and we were showing
shots on different. Yeah.
So that's why then we wanted Greg on there, and it made sense to get Greg on there, and it moved the needle. It moved the needle with us forcing the needle move. Obviously, you had to put the slope in. But there was a good element, I felt, that Greg was also moving the needle himself. Like he was able to possibly ask his own inner questions. How am I doing this?
Yeah, totally.
What is making this happen? Like, they're saying it's changing, and I believe what they say from the grass, because, Greg understands a lot, but he doesn't look at the grass and instantly can read them. Like, you're interpreting, saying that's better, and he's buying in. But there is a big element for the student, which in this case was Greg, that he could say, he could pull on his own feelings without you having to give him ones that you feel. And where that's really good for some coaches, and it can work for students. Anyone who's coaches listening, we've all worked with loads of students. You say things and it doesn't resonate with them, and you have to work out to say it in a different way. What the slope was able to do is make us not really have to say much. It forced him to feel it himself. And my experience with coaching, when a student has eureka moments themselves, maybe aided by the coach, but they find things, they come back to you or in a lesson, they say, oh, that felt like that then. And you can go, cool, just whatever it felt like, keep doing it, because I can't feel it. I know what it feels like to me. What does it feel like to you? Those are often the ones that have the bigger breakthroughs that sustain.
I agree. Yeah.
They come back and they've still got that feeling to hang on to. The ones often that you have to really force verbal feelings on, sometimes they work, but I find they're less sticky. They come back, and whatever you've articulated, obviously that feeling hasn't stuck. So that's what was stand out for me. And it then led us on to saying, didn't it? I mean, we talked about it, like, we're not even scratching the surface here. We've literally put him on one slope. There's many slopes. That stage slopes against itself as well. You can mix the slope up as such. We're not really touching the surface of what we know that people do and can achieve or can't from different lies. Bearing in mind, they go out and play on different lies. I mean, how many balls are they hitting from a zero slope on a round of golf? Like a tiny
hardly any. Yeah.
Because even a tee, because people say, well, a tee's flat. Well, it isn't, is it? Because the ball's an inch off the ground for one. So that ball is above your feet, and then you sink into the grass, depending on how long or tight it is. And not all tees are flat as well. It did make us think there's a lot here that we could really learn from, and hopefully help other people, coaches, move the needle for their students. It made me buy things like this. This is a doorstop.
Yeah.
Like, what can I do to get someone on a different slope and then get them on my plates and measure them? Which I haven't done enough testing with, but when I do it on my own, it makes, when I put my foot on that door slope, horizontal makes no sense because I'm just falling off it. Torque makes loads of sense, which is basically what the slope did, didn't it? So that was the standout for me. I think it was great to watch Greg discover it himself, and it has seemed to have stuck, I would say, Greg, a little bit more, isn't it? You've definitely.
Can I just tell you guys, like, one of the things that I liked about it was you were able to feel a different movement, but also striking a golf ball. So that immediately I bought in, because immediately I saw my path improve, my ball flight improve. Like, there were so many things that tick boxes for me as a student that I was like, oh, this is what I need to do, because I want to see that ball flight again. And I could feel the difference in movement. It made me want to go up and down the slope versus across the slope, So I was able to really feel the difference in movement, but buy in immediately to, I need to be moving like this. And so, I left you guys and I go away and I start reading more about different ways. I learned from Mark, I learned from you, my coach, we chat about it. And I'm trying to find more information all the time on, well, what's a different way to do this? How can is it half swings? Like, what do I do as a student to move this way now that I understand I need to move this way? Push out of that lead side better. So it was really cool.
Yeah, it was interesting too, because I remember we put you on the slope and you, like, that little loopy draw or the block went to these like bullet straight shots right away. And then we put you back flat and it went back to the old thing. And I remember we joked, we're like, your caddy just needs to find all the downslopes on the golf course and make sure you drive it there.
Right.
And you'll be good.
Well, I think too, Mark touched on it that day, like your ability as a student to really experiment with movement, I was limiting. Like I was definitely keeping within a box that I was used to living in. And I've done a lot more in front of the mirror now and a lot more practice in what I want to feel that lead foot to do. And what I've noticed is it changes what the trail foot does a little bit, like just the little drills I'm choosing to do. It's been really interesting just researching it myself and trying to figure out a way to change that movement, because I like the way the ball flight and the access it gives me to what feels like more club face control. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, and that was the beauty of it as well. The fact that you can physically hit shots and see an instant result with the ball. And I know, we all do lots of lessons where we almost remove the ball. They hit into a net, you remove any ball flight, just change your the way you swing, just change, the way you move your body. But people at the end of the day do want a result. Like there is a small percentage of people who will actually practice that way. And I know, for some people, the better way to change a movement would be removing the ball, but that's not much fun for most average golfers. Like if you're teaching people who come once a month and they're not going to come for an hour lesson and not hit balls. They're coming for leisure and fun, and they want to learn at the same time. So being able to get that instant, not only feedback from the plates and what the slope was doing, but with an instant ball flight result, like you could see Greg lighting up. That was what was so interesting, which is always the best feeling as a coach, when you can see them like going, oh yeah, like I want that. Like, because he even said, like, you can watch the video. There's a video I made a video on this on my channel, which you can go and watch after, and it's, you can see him going, yeah, like I want that. And when you give that to a student, you give them what they want and they physically see it. There's no buying in. They're there.
No,
like
they're bought. Yeah.
You've got them. They're sold. They're in. Let's go. Getting them to hit shots on different training aids and whatever, and they're not in the ball, and then they go and hit a ball and it doesn't come off. Some students like that batters them down. They don't like that. They get frustrated. Some work through it, and they're great learners. But to get people on and move the needle as quick as that was eye-opening into how to get results with students, to make them realize that this is a path they might want to explore and go down.
Yeah. And I love the slope idea as a constraint, right? Because like you said, we didn't say anything. We put it on the slope and said, hit 5 balls. And then all of a sudden, all this stuff changed. And to me, that's kind of the best teaching method. So a constraint-based teaching method where you just give them some constraint in their movement and see how their body naturally reacts to that. And one thing I didn't show, or I didn't mention when I showed this, Greg Swings, if I share again here, the difference in the horizontal force. So remember the
I was going to look at that.
Force. Yeah.
It went down from 18 to 11. I mean, he took it off, which is so obvious, isn't it? Why would you move horizontally when you're scared of falling
on your face?
Right. You wouldn't go that way. You're going to put your foot forward or back. It's like being on a boat. If it was going from side to side, well, you would go with it. You'd be saving yourself. If it was
you'd widen your stance.
You would be going
forward and backwards. Yeah.
Exactly. It's so, that was the thing. It was so obvious when we did it. It was like, this is so obvious how this is changing.
And it was interesting to me the night before at the Swing Catalyst Ambassadors meeting, when that change happened and you and I saw it, and you and I are like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. And everybody else in the room is like, oh, well,
it was. It blew me away, because when you've got a player of that quality, Greg obviously, and the guy hitting, like, conversations getting them to change are big. Like they've got to invest a lot, because they're good players. They don't want to.
And they have ingrained patterns, right? Like you've been playing the game probably since you were how old, Greg? When did you start playing golf?
38 years. Yeah, bit of history there.
Yeah. So there's a history, and there's a lot of ingrained bowler patterns in there that, like, in the past when I've tried to change people's patterns, like with all the stuff I do with bands and with teaching aids and with thoughts and stuff like that, I've never moved the needle that much in one swing.
That
like
quickly,
it's never happened.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's where it was just mind blowing almost.
Yes, absolutely. We have a question there from Ryan, Scott. Do you want to check that one out? I don't know if
Can you touch on the timing of Greg's AP force, the lead foot maintained for a longer time? That's an interesting question, and I haven't. Let me switch back and see. So here's his lead foot force post. So you can see, it's interesting. It does kind of like, you see how it kind of is very low and then kind of ramps up quickly to that big amount. Whereas here, it's almost going in the opposite direction for a while and then shoots up. So yeah, there is something to the timing of these and like the amount. And this is where when we start to get into impulse calculations, like the area under the curve, which is a topic for another webinar, we might be able to see that because he's almost pushing in the opposite direction or kind of pulling back with his lead foot for a significant amount. Then he tries to shoot it forward super quickly. So these are all things that I think, you know, there's a lot of data there to look at and to examine, and timing of the forces. I mean, I always like to see the trail and lead foot force peak at the same time, which he basically does before it. And let's see if he does it after as well. Yeah, they're pretty close to timing the same time. So Greg's got good timing with his forces. And I don't think that was something we worked on. Maybe they're a little mistimed here. So it'd be interesting to remeasure this now on a flat surface and see after all the work he's done, whether the timing is better and whether this force now on a flat surface actually does this, actually doesn't go negative like he did prior to that, and produces this same amount of force. Because essentially this is a training situation, right? This is a drill. And so measuring the drill is fine, but you really have to get it happening, you know, on other surfaces. And then, I mean, the cool thing would be putting him on the opposite slope, right? Putting the ball above his feet, where he has less incentive to push through the lead side and see what would happen then. And that's a drill I like to do quite a bit with my people. I call it the Goldilocks drill, right? Try to go way to one side, way to the other side, and try to find the middle. And so that would be something that is super interesting, but there is a definite difference here in kind of how that force ramps up to its peak here, with the downslope versus with the regular slope for sure. And it's negative here, which is, you know, I wouldn't say probably that ideal. And so it would be interesting to see what it looks like now after working on it for a while, and after and on a flat surface. Or, you know, again, that's why this stage is so much fun. You can just play around with it, this Zen Swing Stage, I mean, and actually measure what's going on. And I think, to me, the coolest thing was the fact that you, without thinking about anything, stayed a little bit more kind of on your lead side. You didn't get as far into your trail side, reduced a little bit of that knee collapse in, and you did all those things without me saying a thing. You just kind of did that on your own, which I thought was super cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to pick up a point that we spoke about earlier as well. When I've tried moving this, not so much on slope, but just I have an idea of moving those graphs around with different players. What was also interesting is that Greg will speak, and he's already kind of mentioned it, and he might mention it again, that he's thinking about like moving the needle, so moving his shape of shot through the ground rather than thinking about his hands and those kind of ideas. And you talked earlier about, you know, if you're a big kind of release cell, the timing aspect of it as well. My experience at the moment has been much more that the better players, when I put them in different situations to move those graphs around, they do fall into the buckets. They do fall into the stereotypes. Does that make sense? So you move horizontal up, and yeah, it gets a little bit drawy, and you increase torque, and yeah, they straighten it out. Because they're coordinated athletes who are not really miles out. When you take Joe Average golfer, the ground doesn't do everything, unfortunately for them. I still find I have to do a balance of both things. I still have to give them a face and path swing for often in turn with the ground. And then what I find is they're complementing each other, which is why it would be functional. And that then moves the needle. So if I just give them the hand and the path fix on its own, that moves it some. If I just do the ground alone, it moves it some. But with the lesser skilled golfers, I do find I still have to do old style coaching as well as, let's say, new style, where you're thinking of the grounds. Where with people like Greg and the guy obviously we saw on the night before we saw Greg, it did feel like, yeah, they can shift the needles because their needle's so little. It needs a little shift, basically. The ground like picks up all the weight a little bit. I don't know if you found that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think old style teaching and coaching, like Greg said, like you used to have to think about that with your arms and your hands and your release and all those things. And so that's kind of ingrained. You've worked on that a bit, but you've never thought about feet before. And so now you've already got that kind of feel, the hands and the arms and the path and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of where it comes from. This is kind of a new way to alter it, where you can And I think I agree with you. If you have no idea where your hands and arms are going and face control and all those things, you got to work on that with a beginner golfer, because they're not just going to get that from talking about the feet. I mean,
Yeah,
that would be
100%.
something that I think.
So it's a balancing of those skills. You got
It
another
is
question here?
definitely, and there could be. I mean, the feet thing worked very well for Greg, and he got it, and he's now running with it and doing very well. But there could be other players who, you might have to give an arm cue. And I've actually adjusted people's plane a little bit. So people who have their hands very high, get them a little deeper. And with a good player, sometimes that just gives them incentive to move more and to produce more torquing in the transverse plane.
Yeah,
So
totally. Yeah.
you give them an arm cue to change the ground reaction forces. And I've had other players that are very efficient at a certain force, and I just change their arm plane to match where their forces or how their forces are working, and that's helped a lot. So I feel like you have to have skills coming from both ends to be an effective instructor. But these ground reaction force plates are relatively new in terms of instructors' knowledge of them. And that's where adding that to what we already know, I think, is where the magic could lie.
100%. I mean, it was interesting as well with the sloping lies. We will come to Michael Finch's got a question, which we'll hit, I'm sure, in a second. What was interesting with the sloping lie idea was basically we were able to. I mean, I think I would question if we would have got Greg to where we got him without that. Like, I honestly don't think we would have got him there.
I don't think so either, because I'd thrown all my tricks at him before.
Yeah.
Hard to convince.
He's a stubborn old sod.
Yes. Yes. I don't want it. Yeah. It's you're right. I think what we had, and we said it earlier, was that you had the perfect storm of me able to feel what we wanted to feel. It measured and tested that way. And the ball flight proved that it was the direction I needed to go as the student. If I wanted to see that ball just fly dead straight, which that sounded all right to me. So yeah, it's definitely it was an easy win across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we do Michael's question?
Sure, Michael. So this one might be for you. I don't know how many younger golfers you've worked with, Mark, but do you think golfers of a young age get the advantage of being more in tune with their ground reaction forces?
Well, I think 2 points. I'm not sure how to take that question. So one, I think a new generation coming through with this knowledge is just going to help them. I mean, especially in a world where I think more golfers understand that distance is so important nowadays. What's also interesting with golfers who have limitations, physical, so juniors being smaller, they're generally very good at working out that they do need to push harder in the ground. How many of those juniors have we all taught whether their hips are like in the next country while they're hitting the ball? Do you know what I mean? Their hips are and their feet are off the ground and what have you. So often they're doing it intuitively. And I think as well, looking back in my past years of coaching, years ago before this tech, I remember working with lots of juniors where you would almost try and dial that back a bit. It would be like, this is a little bit, because they're wild, some, not all of them, but they're not that consistent, but they can send it a decent distance for their size. And I wonder now with the tech, and unfortunately I don't teach enough juniors nowadays, but it would be interesting. I feel like I would be able to give better lessons now. I wouldn't just be stereotypically thinking those hips are like miles out from underneath them, let's dial them back because it looks a bit better on video. Where I think the advantage they would have would be you would be able to make them very efficient. Like an adult, you would just be able to measure where their efficiency comes from, which parts are efficient and not, and work with the individual. So I think, in answer to his question, if I'm reading the question right, I think they will get an advantage because of the knowledge that we're all going to get from it. I think they'll be able to change quicker, because that's really what this tech does. It stops the guessing. It stops the, I wonder if they did this, or I wonder if they do that, which is a process we all have to do as coaches. If you're not measuring, you do have to take a journey. Let's try this. That doesn't work. Let's try this. That doesn't work. Let's try this. That does work. When now we've got certain places we can measure, and certainly with the forces we can measure now with the ground, with Swing Catalyst, it just makes them get to their goal quicker. So I think they'll get the advantage of obviously having that tech, and then the advantage of understanding that their funny trail foot way off the ground as they hit the ball is really functional or not, or their massive clearance of their hips is helping or not, and it can be measured and quantified, rather than us just thinking, well, tour pros don't do that. Yeah, but tour pros are generally 6'4" and really strong people. They don't need
Yeah, and I've
and
had
they
some
probably did do that
discussions.
as juniors. So yeah,
Right. And I've had some discussions with parents because I work with the odd junior, and I think this really helps show like, no, this is an incredible skill that your son or daughter has developed doing this. Like, and when you show them on like he's in the PGA Tour average for driver with this vertical force, like
yeah,
that's a pretty special athletic feat that your son is now or daughter is now doing. Um, I would say leave it alone. I mean, they're having fun, they're hitting the ball far. I mean, and that's where like, I mean, I had those discussions, and I think with the data, you can kind of show the parents that like, hey, this is actually a pretty special thing that they're doing here.
yeah,
And the the opening of the hips too is something that's very interesting because I've seen a lot of kids that have massively open hips, but not a lot of torque on the ground. And
right,
so they've kind of spun out, and that creates some weird. And so that you think because their pelvis is way the hell over here and their belt buckle's pointed left of the target that they have a lot of torque, but if they don't, um, I think that could put them in a weird position that could create some bad strikes. And so because I've seen people with open hips and a lot of torque, which I leave alone, but if I have
yeah,
massively open hips and not much torque, then I would think about messing with that a little bit.
yeah, yeah,
Because I think there are differences, and that's one of the main selling points of the horse blades too, is you can't see the stuff with your eye. You could have two
totally,
people with exactly the same amount of open hips if you measured it on your AMM system or whatever, or just looked at it with your. But one who ripped into the ground and created a lot of torque, and one who didn't, that's a completely different animal. And I
mm-hmm.
feel like one could create a very wipey kind of petty impact, and the other one could create a compressed, pull cut basically. And so these are the things that I think, and I think, to Michael's question, he thinks about Justin Thomas, who, I
Yeah,
mean, I remember going to, I'm a little bit younger than Greg, and, I was, in the late 90s going to junior clinics where I remember there were kids who were jumping off the ground and the coaches would get on their hands and knees and hold their feet on the ground and be like,
no, 100%, yeah,
this
yeah,
is not basketball, we don't jump. We're
yeah,
gonna
Right.
yeah,
and did some of those coaches rob us of a Justin Thomas? Who knows? Maybe they did. Maybe they took away a kid's gift that makes them who they are. So that's something that I think, I think you can make much more educated decisions about that with this tech that you probably couldn't have made previously. And that's why I've been really interested. I've talked a bunch to George Gankis and like, how did that kid Matt Wolf showing up doing all this craziness? How did you decide to just leave it alone? And George hasn't, he's always like, well, got Gucci, and he was just smart enough, and he's brilliant. I mean, the way that he thinks about things, even though he can't really describe why, he was like, man, I liked it. I like what he did. Some of the stuff his lower body was doing was similar to what Hogan did or whatever, and so there's some brilliance there in leaving stuff alone too. That I think you might not have to have George Gankis's crazy brain to figure out with the force plate, right? You might see, well, this kid's got tons of torque and he's, doing some good things here that I think we need to leave alone. So I think we're going to get a lot better at making those decisions as we get more juniors on the plates and monitor
yeah,
things. Because, there could be some patterns, and there was a couple of social media posts I saw recently about that drive, chip, and putt contest that just happened. A lot of
yeah. I mean,
those
they're
kids have their
lift
hips
off, aren't
miles
they?
over here and the
Yeah,
top of their head pointing. They look like Neiman going through it. Like,
yeah,
some of those kids are going to end up with bad backs, and they're, like, are we coaching some kids into some patterns that might hurt them down the road? I don't know. I mean, obviously Neiman, has gotten through doing that thing. That's not something I would teach somebody to do, but if they're doing it already, do you take it away or not? I don't know the answer to that. It's a difficult question, but I think the only way we get towards those answers is to keep measuring and follow these kids over time.
yeah, yeah, exactly. You need more case studies, don't you? Otherwise,
Right.
again, we're just guessing. Like, just because you can measure doesn't mean you have the answers. And that's one of the things, again, with the slope. It made me think, like, how much do we really know what's changing on the slope? Again, we haven't got enough case studies measured to know, and it was the
Yeah.
beginning of that journey, which I thought was really exciting. Because I remember even questioning how much is the lie of that club actually affecting that ball, because I don't think it's affecting it at all. Where
Sure.
if you were to do a stereotypical lesson of a sloping lie, well, ball above your feet, loft points further left, la-di-da-di-da, below your
We
feet.
want to change all that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just thinking, well, I reckon with that loft of iron, I reckon that lie is changing that ball for like zero,
Right.
considering to what I've seen with face his path and how he's pushing in the ground, because that is a needle shift in what he's done. And it's overrid any of the lie ideas of what a sloping lie would do. So it also made me think about how little we actually know what players are doing and how they're performing off sloping lies, which for the amateur golfer who wants to get better as pros, for one, I think that's a failing. Like, I feel failed. Like, I want to know more. I want to understand more so we can help them be better and get away from the cliches that often the stuff that isn't measured, we have to almost roll back into, because what else have you got if you haven't got them? So it was a can of worms that Greg opened there, wasn't it? Basically.
There you go.
And it definitely was. And I think, to me, like, most golf instructors that I've talked to have a stock answer. Like, if the ball's below your feet, do X, and if the ball's above your feet, do Y. But if I think about, like, all the different patterns we see in people's ground reaction forces, like, if I'm a very lateral player and get tons of pressure shift off the ball, and you're a very kind of lead side dominant player, shouldn't we adjust differently if our stock is much different?
100%.
It makes sense that we should, but we just don't know those answers. And I've really been talking closely with the guys at the Zen Green Stage and the Zen Swing Stage, and they're really interested in doing some research and finding those answers. So hopefully we can get a lot more of these systems out there and get, you know, a lot more data collected so we can start to understand the answers to some of these questions. So
you got Tyson's got a question for you. There's quite a good one. I don't know if you see that one.
What route would you take with a player whose hips are super open and no torque? I've recently started to work with a player who moves like this. I mean, just take the same route we did. I mean, if I have learned anything from this webinar, I try to get them to hit a bunch of balls on a downslope. Put the ball below their feet, or sorry, put them on a downslope like that. Ball below their feet, and have them hit a bunch of shots and see how they react to that. Obviously, you know, if you don't have the swing stage and the sports plates, you won't be able to measure it, but you can still see what happens there. And then all the stuff that I do with bands and different cues to get them pushing in the ground more. You know, sometimes people go behind the lead calf and push on their foot forward to get them to try to push back. Is there anything, Greg, that you found really useful to you post this that kind of got that feel happening a lot better?
So I experiment with your bands. I actually experimented with, you know, those things that you can buy in the gym that you can slide along the ground. And I actually attached a band to one of those. So I would attach that to the lead foot, ball of the lead foot. I'd stand on it. And at the start of my downswing, just no hitting balls, I'm just feeling it. I would start to try and feel push towards out away from me, and then that was just, and I wouldn't even complete the swing. I would just try and feel that initiation of motion pushing that way, and then the ground would push me back and open me up. Another option I've experimented with is just and these are all rudimentary, but they were just cheap options. Cardboard box. I put that under my lead foot. I saw that online, and under the ball, and I would try and feel the cardboard box sliding away from my body at the initiation down. So it was really just getting me used to moving in this motion rather than this motion. It was really quite fascinating. And so the other one, I just put a weight on the ground. I have a 12-pound weight, and I try and feel like I initiate again by pushing into the weight.
Pushing your toe into the weight.
As I start my downswing. And all of these were out hitting balls. They were just trying to get me, trying to feel a new motion. We didn't say it earlier, but, you know, anecdotally, one of the things that I'm sort of noticing, my strike bias has gone from a heel, particularly with driver, into way more toe/center. I really battle hitting it out of the heel in my old sort of mode, but when I get this right, I'm now experiencing a lot more center strikes and leaning towards a toe bias, which is my preference, but that's been something I've experienced as well.
And that makes sense a ton, because if you're getting more shear force out of your lead side, there's more towards shoving your pelvis and your body back away from the golf ball, which is going to bring the golf club with it. Where, I mean, to me, the cure for kind of the early extension, whatever you want to call that, fault, is the same thing we've worked on. So if you have those kind of amateur golfers who, you know, early extend or whatever you want to call it, get in there and lose that space. Lighting up that left foot shear force is the way to create more space. Great. Let me see what we got here. Ryan Hawley likes to use the slant boards to have players feel this. So that would be kind of like what Mark's idea was with the doorstop, Ryan.
Yeah.
I think that's probably what he's a slant board. Yeah, so it's kind of the same thing as we're talking about. So I think even if you don't have a swing stage and a swing catalyst plates, I mean, having some ability to put people on little slopes, like you use your doorstop or a slant board or whatever. I feel like all of these are really excellent tools now that, you know, and I think that's the way things work generally, right? We find out something using really expensive tech, and then we invent the 30-cent whatever doorstop to to make it work. Or you use your piece of cardboard, you cut up your Amazon box and put it under your lead foot in the living room, and get the feel for that. I love that as kind of a coaching cue. So there's one that came up here, Mark and Greggy, do you change shot shape or trajectory more with weight and pressure than you may have in the past? So I think that's kind of the discussion we got into earlier, Greg, because now you're struggling to draw it and you don't know how to draw it anymore.
Yeah.
So is that something that's much different than you did in the past?
Yeah, definitely. I can see a future where I may not think about, I may tap into ground forces to shape shots or change the shape of a path of a club than I would in the past. Normally I would have to, you know, manufacture the path in some way, shape or form. And so Mark can probably speak to this way better than me. He's lived on the swing catalyst plates for a long time now. And he is actually who I go to ask about how do I draw the ball now.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely a future I could see. And I'm already experiencing just through the ability to feel what I want to feel, push out that lead side. I'm using that as my straight ball flight kind of feeling or fading kind of feeling. And it's just a stock shot that I'm moving towards because it feels very, very safe. And but I'd love the opportunity down the line to, hey, I really need to draw this, particularly with driver. That would be kind of useful. So it's been really, really fascinating to learn.
Yeah, I'm the
How
same.
about Mark,
I mean,
in your own game? Yeah, are you using this?
100%, 100%. It's a revelation. It's completely different. I use it to react, you know, so I hit a tee shot and overdraw it the next tee shot. If there's no room on the left, I am pushing out of that lead foot way harder. Like it's a reaction tool that I'll use to get around the course and keep the ball in play. Every good player and any golfer, I try to work with all my levels of students to have reactions, because the biggest thing is on a golf course is it goes wrong. It doesn't go wrong. It's when it goes wrong, what tools have you got to make it go less wrong on the next one? So having good reaction tools is great. The thing with the pushing in the ground as well is it's so tactile. Like it's so compared to a wrist angle or an arm position or a hip movement or a knee movement, which is, if you're honest with yourself, this is why we went to using video cameras. This is why we use motion capture now, if we can. You don't really know how far you've turned your hips. Like you might say that feels more, that feels left. Now I can tell you if I've pushed in the ground differently. Because it's such a tactile feel, because not only do you push, it pushes back. Like you get this kind of double whammy of confirmation or not. But the thing is, what's so interesting is if you've never built a swing or been on plates and you've never felt that, at the start, it's abstract, bizarre, weird, and hard. When you start seeing it changing ball flight and you start using it, you start thinking, oh my word, like I only want to feel this. If I have to feel other things, then that feels more fiddly to me. So again, my point earlier, when I give a student any kind of ground force swing thought along with a face and a path swing thought, I really don't want them to have that face and path swing thought. I want to drop that 2 sessions down, 3 sessions down, if I can get the ground to do everything. Because when you get them to actually start feeling the ground, obviously you can feel the ground. You're stood on it all the time.
Your whole life.
You've tuned out of it. You've just tuned out of it. And we've been bred to think about a wrist angle, a swing position, a wrist hinge, an arm angle, whatever, an elbow position. And they're all still relevant and can be used to great effect. But if you can get it to a stage where it is as simple as I'll slide and I draw it and aim accordingly, I'll push in that lead foot harder and get those torque values shooting up, and I hit it straight to slightly fade it, like that's empowering on a golf course, personally, I think. And the students I've got anywhere near that level, they're like, wow, you know, I'm hitting these shots. I couldn't tell you where the club's going. Great.
Right.
Let that go. Let that flail around and do whatever it needs to do. If you can feel the ground and change things, then that's great. Because guess what? You're connected with the ground every part of every day. So you
Right.
can feel it. You've just tuned out of that sense a little bit.
Right.
So I think it's similar to aim point, isn't it? It's a little similar to aim point. You know,
Sure.
reading the green through your feet is quite revolutionary for some people still. It's so obvious if you think
Right.
like, you go on a boat, your brain pretty tells you pretty quick if that boat isn't level, because
Yeah, it's gonna go like this, you're gonna lean. Yeah.
you feel it straight away. Not
Sure.
only horizons moving, but through the feet.
Right.
It's a skill that we're born with. Your little one, you know, they're learning to walk or are walking. They're
Sure.
pushing up, they're leaning, like we're doing it from the beginning. And for golf, I think we've kind of tuned out of it
Right.
and think it's a shoulder turn or an arm position. So
Sure.
actually getting people back in that way, yep, you can control ball flight, high, low, left, right shapes. And it's very empowering, I personally think.
I agree. And I think, Greggy, like when you're practicing on the range, I would go back and try to do your old thing. Try to
Yeah.
move left and right as much as you can. And I think that's where your draw is going to come from. And I don't think you'll be able to do it as much now that you've worked so hard on the opposite. But I think once you tune that back in and figure out how much you need it to hit that little draw when you need it, I think that's and it's interesting to me. Like I was talking about this with somebody the other day. Like I like to call a driving range. Like people want to hit it perfect on the driving range all the time, but it's a training space, right? It's a space where I equate it to my son's little playpen, right? There's walls around the playpen to make sure he doesn't fall and hit something, and it's padded, so he's safe to explore and to fall and that's what the driving range is. You're safe to explore, and like there's no problem with going to the driving range and doing your old thing for a while to feel what that feels like and see how the ball reacts and that it's something you could maybe use to hit that draw.
Yeah, and that's an interesting.
Probably going to hate it, but yeah, I'll try it.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point with when you start using ground forces with students, is you do start to feel like it can be more brutal movements, like quite brutal feelings, pushing hard, swaying hard, moving hard, and feeling those forces in the ground hard is really good. Like you do have to, like I said earlier, relearn them and find them. And not being less fragile, almost like some lessons can be a little bit fragile. And it was a little bit like that with Greg, to be fair. Before we moved the slope, you know, there were big words, big instructions being used, and the needle wasn't really moving that much. We had to like go, okay, we'll take your safety net away. We will put you on that downhill slope. We'll make the horizontal feel weird. You know, it's I think when you start using the ground with students, you can be quite brutal, and they can. And they find some amazing nuggets of feelings in there to control the ball differently to how they ever have, basically.
Yeah, and I find a lot when you make those changes. I know you, Mark, you mentioned that you're trying to do all these wacky things in your swing, which feel crazy to you, and then you take a video and you're like, well, that doesn't look that crazy. Like it feels crazy to you, but then you look at the video and you're like, because I've done some things with my own golf swing where after the round I talk to the guys about, oh, that crazy thing I'm doing, like, they're like, what are you talking about? Your swing looks the same as it always looked. So,
well, that's the tactileness of it, I think.
Yeah.
You've tuned out of it, you start tuning people into it, and they start feeling big pushes in the ground. You know, walking is a big push. You're moving your whole weight. It's a big push of your body. Talk to anyone who's got injuries. Talk to older people who struggle to walk because their bodies are getting older and things are failing. Walking is a huge propel forwards of you to do that, which we take for granted. But in golf, we've nulled ourselves. We've kind of like numbed ourselves to those feelings. So then when you start feeling in, they're big, they're early, they're fast. I literally did a video went on my YouTube channel yesterday where we took a guy from 88 miles an hour with his 7-iron to over 101 miles an hour with his 7-iron. Just changed when he got his verticals out of the ground. And he did exactly what you were saying, Greg. And when I said the same, you know, oh, that feels crazy. Feels like I'm going to just bury the club in the ground. We were getting him to push down and come up earlier, you know, and he used big language like this is huge and crazy and mad. And then he started hitting it, and he was like, you'd show him on the video and in the Swing Cat software and stuff. And he was like, is that my last one? Yep. It doesn't look very different. If we didn't have the plates, you wouldn't be able to really tell us it was different. But when we showed the graph, it moved the needle. It moved the needle of when he delivered his forces, because we had gears on as well. His hand speed was basically peaking down near the ball. So we wanted
Right.
peaking much earlier on. His hand speed didn't change. His
Right.
hand speed stayed the same. We just got it to peak way earlier by him pushing differently in the ground. And then those forces got to the ball. He was hitting 7 irons at 101 mile an hour. This guy plays off 14.
Yeah.
Like, it was hilarious. You can watch it on YouTube.
Yeah.
You can see him just going, oh my God, that's so different. And
Right.
again, through measuring.
Totally. So Nick Middleton, who is part of the Zen Swing Green Stage company, has an interesting comment here. It's likely that we have way more sensitivity to gradient changes that fuel the important feel factors we require to cue the appropriate movement changes. So it's great, therefore, to have a golf stage that provides those fine, controllable slope changes. And he reminded me that I'm coming to your neck of the woods, Mark, in the end of the month.
Yes.
So there will be a seminar for both golfers and golf coaches. Anyone who's interested in this stuff and wants to show up, if you go to the Swing Catalyst website, you can see details on that. We will be in Sheffield at the Zen Stage facility there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has the Swing Catalyst and the Zen working together. So please, if you're in the UK or you can travel to the UK to join us, please do so. Mark, you'll be there with me?
I think I am. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
I am.
That'll be great. It'll be a
that
super fun day to start to do some more learning and continue on with this. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. This was awesome. I know Greg has an eclipse to go watch, so we're going to let him get out there and watch that thing.
Yeah, it's hitting Dallas, isn't it? It's hitting
right now.
Is. Yeah, it's hitting Dallas right now. So I'll let you get out there and watch that. Greggy, play well. Mark and I are following your scores and texting back and forth with every bogey and every birdie. So
he's making old man golf cool again, isn't he?
There we
We're
go.
like, what the hell did you do on 16, Greggy? For God's sakes, like, get your shit together.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah, no, I appreciate the support. Thank you, guys. Thanks for your help always.
Awesome. Well, thank you, guys.
Thanks,
thank you,
Scott.
everyone,
Thanks,
for
Mark.
joining us.
Thanks,
this was great. And keep in touch for the next one. We're going to try to do these regularly.
Good.
And please join us in Sheffield in the UK at the end of the month. That would be great.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thanks,
take
guys.
care. Bye now.